Carl, thank you very much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Eddie van der Stok, the president of Victor, which is the IT organization for local authorities, for municipalities in Flanders. Eddie also has a bit of a military background, has been an instructor in the Belgian Department of Defense, although I'm not sure he ever qualified as a commando, but perhaps he'll tell us. Eddie.
Thank you. Sorry. A little bit smaller. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank, of course, the United Nations and the Emirates to bring me to Abu Dhabi, first time in my life. It's a great honor to be here among those prominent speakers here today. So I hope I can switch by just clicking. Yep, that works. So this is me when I was the age of open government. And I'd like you to visualize local open government as a little baby that still doesn't know what it wants in life. And this is me again with not only my hobby, but and also my work. And it's not the blonde lady next to me, but it's the two logos that you can see, and it's Victor and Lola. Victor, as Andrew already stated, is the Flemish IT organization for local authorities. And of course, Lola, with dots between it, L-O-L-A, like it's spelled in my agenda, because I don't want discussions during breakfast. Lola stands for the Linked Organization of Local Authorities, which is an umbrella organization of different countries doing all those interesting IT stuff like standardization and security in local government. Victor by itself is an MPO, and we are having 308 municipalities as members on the northern part of Belgium. And as you can see on the map, Belgium, the distance between Belgium and the Emirates. But of course, we are also an active member, like I already said, of the Linked Organization of Local Authorities, of which I am also the chair until next year. So I don't want to be the party pooper today, but I'd like to say in a critical way that on a local level of government, which is the shortest portal to the citizens most of the time, we don't always like what we see when we're talking about open government or open data. And it's not an easy job to bring the data we daily work with open to the public. So I also come from the Flemish fields, and most of you know that we had around 100 years ago, we had a big sound and light show organized by the Germans in the Flemish fields. And during those days, life wasn't that easy, because as you can see on the pictures, the way they were talking about the war at the officer bar was very different than the way they were talking in the trenches about the war. Yeah? As you can see on those two pictures, I was probably during those days somewhere in the officer's bar, but now these days, times are changing, and I am with my two bare feet into the mud, into the trenches of local government, where we have to do more with less budget, and we have to try to keep the solutions specifically on public services for the citizens. We have to keep them up and running on a daily basis. So there's no time for big theories. It's all about IT with a capital I and the capital T. And then we hear the cry for open data and open government, of course. not always knowing what the cry is for or what they want, but not always knowing where it's going to be used for. But the question is still there, and we have to find an answer. So in Belgium, we have a law on open government, so it's easy, as a matter of fact. If you want something to know more about a project, financial issues on a specific project, just ask them, yeah? But because you can. There's a law since 1994, and you can ask the citizens or the cities, or the municipalities, which the amount of project budget they spend, and they can give it to you. But the problem is, of course, that the way they are giving it to you is not the way you liked it to be, because it's not the way formed as you wanted to see into those specific apps. And we all know it's not about security, it's not about privacy-related stuff. We know that it's all going to be secure. So stop the discussion and keep those discussions into the parliaments where it should be, and not into the city halls. Only ask us what we want to share and what we can share regarding the privacy regulations. And maybe, just maybe, if you've looked very well, most of the things you should know about your government is already on specific, on the internet or on specific websites where they are sharing, as we speak, the budgets, the projects, all about the different parking spaces and all we want to know from our government. Maybe it's already shared at this point. So what I want to talk about also is that don't give us, if we are spending a lot of money on creating open data or trying to bring open government, well, if we do the job and spend a lot of money, don't bring us for the X time, the same application. Try to bring us something sexy, try to bring us something new that is really helping us forward and is bringing back the investments that local government is doing during these days where a budget cut is on the agenda on a daily basis. So I'm scared that as somebody walks into my office and says, you know what, I have a fantastic app where you can show your budget plan on a yearly basis, drawing lines, and you can see on different months and different years how many you spent on that project. And then you ask again, so you mean a line graph or a bar graph? Oh yeah, that would be a good idea. That would be a great name for my new app. So if they say that, you can be sure that they found a new source of warm water. And then, of course, like I said, where are the killer apps? Yeah. Where do we spend our money? It's also tax money. If you want us to invest on open government, please do realize that it costs a lot of money, and if you don't do anything with it, it's an investment that should be on the list the next time you consult the open data list. And the challenge, of course, is the big linked data story, where every data source is linked to each other, and we can search whatever we want. We can query whatever the question we have into the data sources. But nevertheless, if you have everything linked and everything is known by the government, don't be scared and don't make it the next time a public scandal. I don't know how to react on people who expect that the government should know everything, but when we do know everything, they make it, as we said, a public scandal. Yes, it's all about the sharing stuff. And let's say the city of A on top of the screen, left top of the screen, and the city of B wants to share a specific data source, let's say the criminal register of a specific city, and they want to share it with each other. Well, it's not always easy because the data format they have of the criminal registers, most of the time, it's not the same, and the app won't read the different way the data is formatted. So we know we all know where the pain is, and it's not always only about just opening the data. It's about forming the data, formatting the data, creating standards where you can use the data you share in one app of all the different municipalities you want to see it. So what is the challenge? Well, think in standards from the start of the beginning of your project. Try to think in standards, specifically when you're talking about data, and why not on a later base when you're talking about processes before you think in applications. And this is why we created the project Open Standards for Local Administrations or Local Authorities with the name Oslo. As I already said, our organization is on the crossroad between local government, regional government, federal government, but of course also between the citizen and the private sector. We all try to create better public services, work on better public services, provided by more intelligent and smarter cities. One of the hot topics is how to determine how the data we use on a daily basis can be made more useful, can be made reusable. But the work in the field learns us that in reality, we're having trouble with sharing readable data to all our systems, and that the compatibility is costing us a lot of money, like I already said, sometimes for a little added value. And it's not because central government is putting strict information security regulations on top of the data that there is no decentralized freedom. Most of our city administrations want to give the best services, but they do not always realize how to handle it with care. So privacy issues are a mix of what we can do with the data, how we use it, and who is using it. And the quality of the data is depending on where it comes from. So even if we would open every single data source we have, not all the information we own would be of good quality, as I already stated. As we live in a country where federal and regional government is providing well-defined, standardized, authentic sources, it's not always easy on a local government to hook on your specific data, to hook on your metadata we have and we should use to bring better public services to the citizens. And that is why, little child with the egg, we can't lay our egg as a local government into the authentic sources we have on a regional or federal level of government. So in the project of, this is the situation before Oslo, as you can see, the federal level and the regional level and the local level is there. The authentic sources we are using from federal government are going through the level of the regional government straight to the local government level. But the different services at the local government level aren't able, or they can't, because of regulations, aren't able to use or to share the different data sources to each other. So what you create is the Wild West, because everybody is going to create his own data source where they can use the metadata they want to use to give the better public services to the citizens. In the new paradigm with Oslo, we want to create a mid-office. We want to create a mid-office on a shared platform with the name Magda, where we can put on the Oslo standard as a data service, of course with security level of authentication and authorization, so the local government level can use the Met Office as data services, and later on maybe as a process service. Talking about the project, but I want to skip some slides. But the project we started was with 28 organizations in the field of the local government, and we had the honor to be supported by some representatives of the European ISA program. So the homework we did, we were able to hitch onto the European standards and models that are used. We also are a member of the W3C consortium, where we like to share the standard that is created to the world. So we like to hook on the private sector into this solution. The entities we put in the standard at this point of the project are persons, organizations, localization, and public services. And this is the data model. I'm not going into the details. You probably can't see the details. But what I would like you to watch to is the green and yellow level. And as you can see, the yellow spots are the enrichment on a local level. So the green are authentic sources on federal and regional level. And the need for the enrichment was very high, as you can see on the data model we created. So as I already said, we tried to use the ISA core vocabularies and create, I should say, bottom up some local ISA extensions. So it's reusable. Normally it would be reusable for other member states in Europe too. The standard is downloadable, and we have different components, as we have the specifications, the information model, an XSD and RDF format. And the roadmap we're having ahead of us is for the next year, because we're always planning this project within a year with a short milestones. Of course, we like to integrate the standard into the public tenders, so every municipality is going to use the standard when they are providing or when they are having a procurement. Of course, we would like to have a covenant between public and private sector in this one, so every private software solution would be hooked on the standards. And in the last phase, of course, we want to have as many as pilots as possible. This one I'm going to skip. So talking about semantic collaboration, well, if you ask us, it's going to be the cornerstone of the next generation of smarter cities. Yes, it's all about open government. Yes, it's all about open data. But double yes, it's all about open standards. And that's what we are trying to say with this project. Think global, act local. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Tai Lambo, the founder of Cloud Assurance USA.
Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to visit this country. Thanks to our wonderful host, Emirates Identity Authority, and special thanks to Richard Kirby and his colleagues for doing such a fantastic job at the UN, making this happen. Thank you so much. So I want to talk about supply risk management in the cloud. So the diagram on the right-hand side, or depending on, right-hand side for most of us and left for some, is a picture of President Obama and Michelle Obama hugging and saying, yes, we can Twitter. It's actually not a real statement. It's just something we made up. But the idea is, if you look at the first election, presidential elections in the US, President Obama, one of the strategies, I guess the Democratic Party actually used to win the election was cloud computing and social media. And that played a very, very key role in his re-election as well. So you look at on the left-hand side, or depending on what side you're in of the room, you see a picture of a guy jumping into the cloud. Can anyone think about what's wrong with that picture? Anything missing there? So somebody's jumping off of an airplane, no parachute, right? And they don't have wings either. So what we're seeing increasingly is a lot of organizations are moving to the cloud without having a safety parachute to make it safe and secure. So you definitely don't want to be one of those companies or organizations. Just a title slide there just kind of described me. Been in IT, information technology about 20 years. Been in information security 17 years. So there's going to be two parts to my presentation. First part, it's going to talk about the what and the why of cloud computing and cloud security, why cloud security is very key. And then the second part is going to share some of our research data from Cloudy Assurance. So if you look at this diagram, it basically describes the National Institute of Standards and Technology model for cloud. So you have private cloud, you have community cloud, you have public cloud, which are the three what they call deployment models for cloud. So it could be something everybody can consume. It could be private within your organizations, or it could be a community cloud, like a government cloud, like an educational cloud. So without getting into technical details, but just know that there are three deployment options for cloud. And then in terms of the cloud service, there are actually software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. And then some of the characteristics are listed here, and then some of the advantages as well. One of the biggest advantages of cloud computing is the ability to be able to scale very, very quickly. You could go from 1,000 users to 1 million users if it's well planned overnight. Some of the key benefits is worldwide collaboration, so being able to put data in the cloud. So with the concept of open government data, the cloud is extremely beneficial from that viewpoint. So one thing I would say, even as a security practitioner, is that don't fight the cloud. I mean, it's actually a good thing if it's done right. You know, don't feel like if we move to the cloud, you know, we're taking all this risk. It's all about taking calculated risks. And then being able to rapidly deploy, that's a very key benefit. What used to take months now takes weeks, in some cases days. And then obviously cost reduction, that's a big one. So some of the security advantages is being able to shift public data. So for, you know, here we're talking about open government data. If the data is not confidential, I think Richard mentioned earlier on this morning that if it's in the public, it's in the public, right? It's no longer confidential. I was just going to say, not the three-letter agency, we all know. So yeah, obviously somebody is listening. So not the CIA triad, it's called the CIA triad, excuse me. Confidentiality, integrity, availability. And trust me, I didn't push a button. It wasn't me. So if you want to look at it from a confidentiality standpoint, public data naturally belongs in the cloud, right? If you want to look at it from an integrity standpoint, you got to be very careful. Carl made a very good point. Good data could become bad data in the cloud very easily. Especially if you're sharing maybe not sensitive data, but demographics data, you know, and you're relying on, or the public is relying on that data to be able to make decisions. You know, for instance, I think Richard shared a hypothetical example this morning of areas where there are good schools, low crime rates, diverse. Imagine if somebody was to change that data and people started making decisions based on bad data. So I would say from an open government standpoint, the biggest thing to worry about with cloud is lack of integrity of the data, as well as availability. Because if the data isn't there, it could actually hurt you as much as the data not being of high integrity. So you've got to watch out for the I and the A. Confidentiality, not so much. So one of the advantages of cloud computing is it actually makes security auditing a lot easier. So instead of auditing several infrastructures, you're kind of focusing on fewer infrastructures. So that could actually be an advantage. And it also makes it easier to automate security. Redundancy, disaster recovery becomes easier as well. So just a quick case study here. In the US, I actually live in the US. I wish I was from Jamaica, but I'm not. I'm actually from Nigeria. I was born in Nigeria, lived in England for a while, and then been in the States 12 years now. And one of the things I'm seeing in the States is the US government is extremely proactive about moving to the cloud, which could actually be a good thing or a bad thing. But the major driver is being able to save something like $10 billion a year. So the US federal government currently spends $80 billion with a B on IT every year, the federal government. And 20 billion of that, there's something called the Cloud First policy. 20 billion of the $80 billion is supposed to be spent on cloud. So currently they have something like 2,000 data centers, and they're looking to consolidate those data centers by reducing them by 50%. And the goal is to be able to save about 10 billion of taxpayers' money a year. So there's a big push towards the cloud with US federal government IT. And the guy who actually led that initiative is a guy called Vivek Kundra, who actually used to be the CTO for the District of Columbia, which is actually in Washington, basically Washington, D.C. And then he became the federal CIO, and he actually migrated 38,000 employees to Google Labs. And some of the things they replaced, was, buying software, hardware, actually they still bought some hardware, but mostly software, replacing them with Gmail, Google Docs, Google Video, Google Sites. And at that time, Google had something like 500,000 organizations that were using Google Labs. I'm sure it's probably gone up to millions now, but they were one of the early adopters from a business standpoint of Google Cloud. So some of the barriers, I'm going to talk about the bad news for a minute for the cloud is security. So, I mentioned that if you're putting public data in the cloud, you shouldn't worry too much about confidentiality. But there's something called a username password, right? If you're allowing users to enroll in your system, and they're basically supplying username password, potentially those login credentials could actually be used to compromise other systems. Just by a quick show of hands, and you don't have to, how many of us have a LinkedIn account? So I'll say half the room, right? Okay. LinkedIn had a major security breach a couple of years ago. I hope you got the email, and I hope you changed your passwords. But we actually found that a lot of even our technically savvy customers, for instance, chief information security officers for major enterprise, major government agencies, were using the same password as they were using on LinkedIn on their online banking, as well as their company email. So if your LinkedIn password gets compromised, guess what the bad guys are going to try and do? They're going to try and use that same password on other critical systems. So you think about it, LinkedIn doesn't have much in terms of, because it's all public, right? You could see it as public data. You publish a LinkedIn profile, most of the time you're going to want it to be public. But that compromise of a cloud-based solution could actually be used against you as well as your organization. So those are things you got to be aware of. So security is definitely one of the barriers. So when you're looking at a cloud service provider, you've got to ask the right questions. You've got to do your due diligence. So first thing you've got to think of is what level of security is right. If it's public data, do you need them to be, top security, or could you accept something moderate or low? How sensitive is the data? Do you have customer list? Do you have citizens, personal information? Is it regulated data? And do you need to encrypt? And if you need to encrypt, that needs to be part of the contract. And where's the data housed? Is it in the country? Is it offshore? You've got to consider all those things. Who has access to the data? Typically, the system administrator has every access, whether you like it, you admit it or not. They typically have the keys to the kingdom. And then what happens if the data gets exposed to other customers? These are things you definitely got to factor in. So generally speaking, there are three options. Carl mentioned FedRAMP. FedRAMP is a federal government certification and accreditation process in the US. Applies to private sector if they're providing cloud services to the government, right? So they have to follow FedRAMP as well. So, you could actually choose to conduct your own on-site security evaluations or assessments, or you can ask the cloud service provider if they have a good security program in place. 9 out of 10 times, they're going to say, yeah, we're great. But you've got to trust but verify, right? And then thirdly, the third option would be to utilize some sort of independent security evaluation like FedRAMP or ISO 27001. There are different certifications out there that applies to the cloud. So let me talk about the approach we take as Cloud Assurance. We've been around 2 years, and we typically sit between, I'll say, the cloud customer, the cloud auditor, the provider, and the broker, kind of acting as the intermediary between those four stakeholders. And we have a simple 3-step process. The first step starts with the cloud service provider performing an assessment, so they do a self-assessment against a baseline set of controls, right? It could be FedRAMP, it could be ISO 27001, it could be the Cloud Security Alliance, standards, which kind of a globally known, globally adopted standard, controls for cloud. Once they've performed the self-assessment, they get a provisional score. And then that provisional score needs to be validated by an independent third party. So currently, there are 2 major companies that do ISO audits. One of them is SGS. They're the largest ISO auditors in the world. They do probably more audits than anyone that I know of. And then there's a company called TUV as well that has been qualified to do the independent validation of scores derived from our platform. And then once the validation has been done, they could actually publish a seal in their marketing or their website that shows their score. So it's something you kind of continuously monitor, right? And that 3-step process kind of repeats itself. So it's an ongoing process. So just a bit about the algorithm behind the platform. The platform itself is a software as a service platform built on a cloud infrastructure. We typically use Windows Azure, which is Microsoft's platform as a service. But it's standards-based, without boring you with the details. We kind of take a standards-based approach and a risk-based approach. So multiple standards are supported within the platform. Any new standard that comes out gets integrated into the platform. So it's constantly being improved. And how many of you actually use any of the cloud service providers mentioned in here? We have something we call our top 10 cloud service provider study that we do every quarter. How many of us use like Microsoft or HP? Probably not many of us. But what we actually found is a lot of people move to a cloud service provider without actually saying, how good are they? How good is their security? Some of you might think, okay, this is all public cloud, doesn't matter. But I bet you probably have private cloud within your environment, whether it's government or private sector. I'm sure you probably have some shape or form of private cloud. You need to ask the same questions as well. So we found that Microsoft, HP, and Symantec actually made the top 10, I would say, in the past 1 year. We started publishing this study January last year. And what we do is we actually cap the scores at 600. So it's based on compliance against a baseline set of controls, and it's also based on process maturity. So we measure compliance, but we actually go beyond compliance, because you could be compliant, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're secure, right? So we measure compliance as well as security based on the algorithm I showed earlier. And this pretty much just shows you kind of a different view of that top 10. We also found about top 10 what we call control gaps amongst the top 10 cloud service providers. So the most common one is a lot of them were not providing encryption of data at rest. So if you put your data in the infrastructure, they actually weren't giving you the tools to encrypt your data, right? And that's a very, very critical control that these days you just have to. It's something you need to do. Just a snapshot of some of our users here. Not sure if the interactive poll is loaded into the system, but I'll just say, just think about these questions. Think about this and how does this really apply to my environment? Go back to your organizations and start asking these questions. How many cloud services are we currently using? If the answer is unknown, somebody needs to be able to answer that question. That may not be you, but somebody within the organization, whether it's your CIO or head of security or head of IT, needs to be able to answer that. The second one is, how do you assess? Then from a risk standpoint, like I said again, if the answer is unknown, you definitely want to get an answer for this. And then how do you automate the assessment? How do you do continuous monitoring of controls, especially technical controls? They're definitely questions you got to answer. So if you're interested in downloading a copy of our report, from this independent study that we do called the Top 10 Cloud Service Provider Benchmark Study, please go to www.cloudyassurance.com. And thanks very much. I know it's tail end of the day, and really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tai.